Parenting from a broken place next on the Very Cari podcast.
You found the Very Cari podcast. Grab yourself a cup of coffee and snuggle in while you and I chat about all things faith, wellness, and healing.
Welcome to the Very Cari podcast. Today I'm going to be very vulnerable with you. I try to be authentic and vulnerable every time I come to you, but today I really want to talk to you about parenting and not as an expert. Let's be clear. I am not an expert on parenting. It is a really hard thing. And the more I get into parenting, the more I realize the less that I know about being a parent. Now, if you're watching the recording of this, it is downstairs in my living room, not up in my podcasting studio. And I know, much to the chagrin of my podcasting guy, he's probably like, wow, that's messy life. It is. It's messy life taking place behind me. So it's just very authentic, very real. I'm getting over a cold, so you may hear me sniffing a little bit. I'm going to try to not do that. And also, I'm going to hope that the antihistamine has kicked in. Parenting is hard, and I do not come to you as an expert. I do not come to you as somebody who knows anything about it. I only come to you as somebody who has parented and has been through a little bit of parenting at the time of this recording. So now the year at the time of this recording is 2025, and I have a 26-year-old daughter, a 25-year-old son, and as of today, a 15-year-old daughter. Now, I was very young when I had my daughter, Courtney, and my son, Chase. They are just 14 months apart. And so I believe I was 23, 24 when I had them, and I did not know anything about parenting. And sadly enough, looking back, I have got lots of regrets about the way I did things and wish that I could do things differently. Now, I am quite close to my son, Chase, and we have had the opportunity to discuss this whole parenting thing and what does it look like as an adult looking back on how your parents parented and what does that look like? On this side of it, what does that look like for him? And thankfully, he has graced me enough to forgive me for the mistakes that I made and really move forward. I think that he'll be a phenomenal parent because of this self-reflection and this idea of understanding your parents and where they come from. But I have to tell you, this same process took place with me as I came into adulthood. Now, let me go back and tell a story. Now, when I speak of my parents and my grandparents, I want everyone listening to know that it is absolutely not reflective of these individuals and how I feel about them now. A lot of people might say, wow, Cari, that's disrespectful of your grandmother that's passed. That's disrespectful of your grandfather that's passed. And I do not mean that. I mean it purely for reflective purposes and kind of coming to a place of understanding where they were coming from. So let me tell you a story and some things that have really helped me and something that my son said. My son said to me the other day, I know it's cliche, Mom, but we're all broken people. And when you parented me from a place of being a broken people, being a broken person, being a broken mom, it's just how it was. And I can't do a lot about that except for to move forward, learn from past mistakes, and hopefully do a better job, here on out. But that is true. I was parenting as a 23-year-old, as a 24-year-old from a very broken place. And that's not anyone's fault. So as I tell you this story, please know that it is not, I hold no hard feelings, no anger, no resentment towards anyone in my family. This is just educational purposes. So if I look back at my mom and dad, Larry and Carol Terhurst had Cari Marie Terhurst when they were 20 and 21 or 21 and 22. So very young coming into parenthood. And, they did a pretty gosh darn good job. They did a good job considering they were both broken people. Now, again, I'm speaking of the dead, but my grandmother has gone on to be with Jesus. She wasn't a great mom. She really wasn't. She was very hard on her kids. She never told my mother that she loved her until my mom became an adult. My mom was forced to stay home, take care of her step siblings, was not allowed to have her own life. There were a lot of very unfair, very unjust things that happened to her. Her actual real dad was an alcoholic, left them, very early on. Some of my mom's earliest memories of him were beating her brother. So, I mean, y'all listen, we're not talking a great background. So, Carol came from a place of being broken, but gosh darn it, she pulled herself up by her bootstraps and she said, I am going to make sure that if I have children, they know that I love them and I support them. And she did just that. So you have a woman who was raised very broken by a very broken woman that I loved my grandma very much, but she just didn't do a great job showing love and raising kids with confidence and raising them in the Lord. But God is faithful. My mom had a wonderful grandmother named Banny who loved Jesus. And my mom turned out okay, right? And here she comes into parenting Cari at 21 years old, 21, being a broken individual. My dad was raised by my grandmother, is still alive. My grandfather's gone on to be with the Lord, but he was a very hard man, a very hard man. It was not uncommon for people to get punched or hit or, hey, listen, I spanked my kids. I'm not talking against spanking, but we're talking like more than just a spanking. My dad had to work very young, had to start paying his own way very young, paying rent to his parents, but I believe as a young teenager, maybe mid-teens. I'm sorry if I don't have that wrong. And again, I loved my grandfather. I love my grandmother. This is not a reflection of how I feel about them as people, but they were broken. And then they raised my father, and my father parented from a place of being very broken. And, he and I have had long conversations about the shoulda, coulda, wouldas and the things that he had done differently. Now, I think my parents did a great job raising me. It was not an easy life. It was not an easy life. My children, a lot of kids out there these days, they don't have any idea of what it was like being raised in a different time. It was definitely a different time. I grew up on a farm. It was expected that we would haul in firewood. It was expected that we would help stack and manage that heating system, that firewood heating system. It was expected that we would work hard in the summer, bucking bales. I mean, I was bucking alfalfa bales when I was, 11, 12, driving the truck, 13. And, my dad he was hard on us. He was physically, we got spanked a lot, sometimes very unfairly. But it was a vast difference from the way that he was raised. So each generation, I feel like, is doing better. My dad was raised a certain way, and he certainly did not raise us girls like that. But he raised his kids quite a bit more rough, I guess you could say, than I raised my kids. Now, again, I don't hold any hard feelings, but there are, and out of respect for my dad, I don't want to share everything, but there were definitely times when I feel like it was excessive. And he and I've talked openly about this. So again, I don't hold any hard feelings, but he was a broken person parenting from a broken place. And then he parented me. And let me tell you, I was a rough kid. I was a rough kid. You have two parents that are fairly easygoing, passive kind of people. And then you give them a Cari. And Cari wants to know why. Cari knows the right way. Cari is hard-headed, bullheaded, all of that. That is me. And I was hard on my parents. It's very hard. It's very challenging to raise a child who is a challenge when you just want peace and kids to obey. So my parents were tough on me. And I can see why. Now that I've raised kids, I can see why they did what they did. I probably suffered from a little bit of attention deficit. But back then we didn't have names for those things. You just got spanked a lot and you lined up. And, I turned out fine. I don't know. How do you measure success? I mean, I have college degrees, I have a home, a successful career. I have a podcast. I don't know. How do you, how do you measure success? And then fast forward, these wonderful people, Carol and Larry, raised a Cari. And then I go on to parent at a very young age as well. And I was broken. I was broken. And I did what I thought was best. I raised my kids, the older kids, with a set of ideals that align closely with religion. Sadly, I tried to show them spirituality, like what a walk with Jesus looked like. But I was so concerned about what other people thought about my kids and the way they appeared. I deeply regret saying things to my daughter, Courtney, like, well, let's make sure we look pretty, dress up, wear a dress, go to church. Because she was pretty and didn't have to wear a dress. The ideas of you had to wear your best to church. These ideas that the way you looked, the way you acted, just a certain ideal, and it was based on appearances, not really the heart. And if I could go back, of course, oh my gosh. I mean, if you could talk to my grandpa, my grandma now, they would say I would do things differently. My mom and dad would, everyone wants to do things differently. But I was parenting from this place of trying to attain some kind of perfection with my kids, wanting them to be, a certain way, being hard on them, not knowing, and this is the biggest thing, I did not have a lot of knowledge or training or understanding on how to manage their individual personalities. Now, my son is a lot like me. I think I did a great job with him. I understood him. I got where he was coming from. I understood, his struggles, his pain. It just made sense to me because he and I were a lot alike. However, my poor daughter, Courtney, very sensitive, very tender, had a lot of anxiety growing up. And I did not understand that personality. Well, just stop being anxious. Like, well, what's the problem? Everything just had to be so. And then, her dad and I about not being together was definitely a destabilization of her world. And it just went on from there. And I think that a lot of the things that I did definitely destabilized her and did not give her a sense of security. And, looking back, I wish that I had had more training, but I was just so broken and so not understanding what parenting looked like in a sense of somebody that was different than me. I was just parenting like what made sense for my personality. And I so wish, I had someone to sit down and talk with. And I did. I sought out the counsel of my parents, but it was tough. It was tough. It's definitely hard when you have a kid that's very different from you to try to parent them. So fast forward just a little bit. And when Courtney and Chase were 11 and 12, I had Anne Marie Grace. Now, I was 35, 36 when I had Anne Marie. So I was older. I'm not saying I had things figured out, but I definitely had a different attitude about parenting. I think I'd done it a little bit. Was I less broken? I don't know. But I had definitely come to terms with a lot of my issues, and I didn't have the ideas about parenting as I did before. I definitely had relaxed quite a bit by the time Anne Marie came around. So consequently, Anne Marie has, at 15 years old, much more confidence, knows kind of who she is as a person, is a lot more secure. And it's interesting. My older kids, especially Chase, when she was younger, would be like, well, let me give you for instance. When my kids were little, I was a brand new ICU nurse and I would not let them play on trampolines. And my older son, Chase Smith, he always tells me, I can't believe you let her play on trampolines. He said, you know how many times I had to sit and watch trampolines? I also would not let the older kids, do four-wheelers, three-wheelers, all that kind of stuff. And now Anne Marie has her own four-wheeler. So I've definitely relaxed. Something else that this is really interesting to look back is now when my mom raised me, uh, just trigger warning, we're going to talk about periods here. When my mom raised me, she would say, well, everyone has a period, and it was quiet, and here's your pad. okay, and here's this. And I'd be like, okay, but I knew it wasn't something to be ashamed of. It wasn't something you talked about. So then when I raised Courtney, I was like, hey, it's a period, but here it is. I kind of kept it still a little bit quiet. And it became something, we would talk about, but not like openly. If she had a question, of course she could ask me. Courtney, you'll have to correct me if I'm wrong. Well, with Anne Marie, I was done with all that. I was like, hey, it's a period. Listen, it's not that big of a deal. Everyone, all women get them. It's nothing to be ashamed of. And that child she is hilarious. She'll come down these stairs, you can see in the recording, and she will come down the stairs and be like, oh, my period is just this and that. And Brandon will go, what? And I'll be like, well, I just raised her not to, it's just not a thing. So I think that's the growth and progression of me in my mothering over the years that always struck me as funny. But, it's interesting. I definitely think that every single person that comes from a home that struggles with discipline things, being able to show love. A lot of you are going to have different issues. I always know I was very loved, even though my dad was pretty rough on us. I knew that I was loved. There's never a question that I was loved. If you saw Papa Larry now, you would never guess that he was the person that I'm describing. He has changed and evolved, and life has changed how he feels about things, and it has adjusted the way that he perceives the world and the way that he approaches me and my daughter. He is totally different. 2025 Larry is very different from 1980 Larry. And of course, so we're all going to change and grow. I mean, that happens. So what I've had to do as an adult is I've had to reconcile the different people in my life. Does that make sense? This is a weird concept. But I look at, and my dad is a great example. I look at 22-year-old Larry holding baby Cari. And then that man that, maybe they disciplined me growing up fairly, unfairly, maybe based on what people said, not what actually happened. You can tell I still have issues about that one. And that is a different person than the man now that I encounter on a daily basis that I can't live without. I mean, he's so precious to me. And I've reconciled them into two separate people. It sounds like I have multiple personality disorder when I tell you guys that, and I'm not. But I have to categorize. I have to say 15-year-old Larry was raised a certain way. He had me. He tried to do the best job he can, parenting from a broken place. And then now, as an adult, he, as this mature, man, 71, 72, he is now this different person. So I've got him categorized. I'm sure that my children have to do something like that in order to reconcile me. But I think that is a really important thing that's helped with my healing and coming to a place to be able to be a better parent, and I hope an amazing grandparent, is the fact that I can separate 1960 Larry, right, from 1980 Larry, from 2020 Larry, from 2025 Larry. And I think that has been very powerful to me. Another thing that has been very powerful to me has been the movie The Shack. Now, it is available on Netflix. If you have not seen it, if you have not read the book, I listened to it on CD. That tells you how old I am. I would highly suggest that you watch the movie, because there is a place in there where the main character, Mac, is reconciling abuse that took place in his life by his father. And I believe it was that section where the Lord allowed him to see his father being abused, or the man that killed his daughter, spoiler alert, being abused. It doesn't make the wrongs that were committed against us okay. It doesn't make it okay. The fact that my dad got punched in the face by his dad, it doesn't go away, and that's not okay. The fact that I got beat with a little horsewhip until I was bleeding and, had to crawl inside the house, like, That doesn't make that okay. It doesn't make it okay the things I've done to my children. But it does help, I believe, us understand that our parents, when, if they truly loved us and wanted us, like I'm talking about good intentioned people, they really come from a place of being broken. They come from a place of maybe not understanding fully how to deal with your personality. When I look back at how challenging and difficult of a child I knew I was from my parents, let me just tell you that poor Carol Terhurst was not prepared for a Cari. A Christy? Yes. A Laura? Yes. Different personalities, not as strong willed, not as stubborn, not as hard headed. It's not my fault that I was always right. Okay, that's a joke. But she was not prepared to parent me. And that is not her fault. She parented from a broken place, doing the best job she could. And I was not emotionally prepared to parent a Courtney. And there's nothing wrong with my daughter. She's an amazing human. She's a beautiful, amazing, well-adjusted human. She is, despite me. I always tell her, despite me, you turned out. But I'm sure there's a lot of resentment and a lot of hurt on her part because I just was not equipped to parent that personality. And I did not know how to do it the right way. And I came at it all wrong. Now, if I had her today, it would be totally different. I get it now. Unfortunately, there are no do-overs, right? So she has to go to therapy and get figured out, like, hashtag how did my mom screw me up? How did that leave me some issues? But I came at parenting that child from a place of just not knowing, not having knowledge, and being so broken myself. Not knowing how to be okay with imperfections, be okay with different personalities, be okay with different drives, different want to be in life, different goals, different ways of achieving goals, different ways of seeing life. I did not understand any of that as a 23-year-old, very young girl having a baby. And I think it's really important that as you look back on your childhood and you look at the trauma and you look at some of the things you went through, and I'm not excusing horrible things. I'm not excusing parents that, abused you sexually, physically. I'm not excusing any of those things. So please don't think that that's a talk of, well, get over it. They were broken. That's not what I'm saying. But I'm saying if we can kind of look at them as as that as that categorized, like I look at Larry, like I'm trying to imagine my mother parenting me at 21 years old. I'm trying to imagine, and I hope that Courtney and Chase and Anne Marie can look back and say, I'm imagining my mom as a 23, 24-year-old young girl who didn't even know what she wanted in life, barely married, trying to figure out how to parent this child. And Courtney was sick. It was just so challenging for me. And I look back now and I see the mistakes. I see how my brokenness affected her. I see that now. And it makes me sad, of course. But, I did the best job I could, understanding what I did, not knowing how to help her the best way I could. What could I have done differently? Oh my gosh, so many things. I could have leaned on the Lord a lot more. I could have reached out to God and really covered my parenting in prayer. And that is what I do now. Those are the changes I would make. That's the encouragement I would make to anyone is go watch The Shack. Number 2, cover it in prayer. When you don't know which way to go, when you don't know which step to take, when you don't know how to handle that child and that personality that is so maybe vastly different than anything you've dealt with in your life, cover it in prayer and God will lead you in the right way. Seek out wise counsel. I can't tell you how much my mother, Carol, and my dad have given me such amazing advice regarding my kids. Anne Marie went through a really rough time about a year and a half ago. And we got her, my dad started talking to, he's a licensed counselor. And he said, we need to get her into her own counselor. And we did. And that girl has turned her life around. She is so much more emotionally secure and grounded. And I'm just so proud of her for doing the hard work and getting in with a good therapist and allowing Jesus to really come in and heal her. She's got a lot of hurts too. And so I'm just so proud of her for doing the hard work. And Courtney, Courtney had a lot of anxiety in undergraduate school. And man, that girl sought out counseling and figured out how to do some cognitive behavioral work and really got her anxiety managed really well. And knowing that it's never probably going to go away for her, but she knows how to manage it. So I'm proud of the hard work. My son Chase married an amazingly well-adjusted parents that raised her not from a place of being broken and just did an amazing job raising her. And he's been able to process a lot of the things that happened in his life with her. And they've worked through it, how they want to be different. He's talked to me frankly and honestly about the things that I've done. And it is just, I'm so proud of him for doing the hard work and trying to prepare himself to be a better parent someday. So I'm really proud of all my kids. But I think if we can really go back and realize that our parents may have been raising us from a place of struggle, from a place of hardship, from a place of just being broken themselves. I think it will help us understand, have empathy and compassion for them and forgiveness in our heart. And we're not saying everything was okay, but we're saying, you know what, Mom? I get it. I don't agree with the way you did things, Dad, but I get it. I see where you were coming from. I see the brokenness. I see that you tried your best. And I want you to know I forgive you and I love you. And thank you for trying so hard as a 21-year-old young girl, as a 22-year-old young man, coming out of a broken home and doing the best job you could. I can recognize that now as an almost 51-year-old woman. I can see that. God makes beauty out of our brokenness. He takes our brokenness and he makes beauty out of it. And this has been just such an evolution in my life. And I'm hoping that me sharing my vulnerable, real, raw story with you will help you understand, maybe not totally understand, but maybe start to have that conversation in your own heart on how can I begin to understand, categorize, forgive, and move past the way that I was parented. If your parents were parenting from a broken place, it's so important to understand where they were coming from and what was going on with them. So I hope that this podcast helped you. It's been good for me. I feel much better. It's been cathartic. It's been great for me to understand that Larry and Carol Terhurst loved me so much, that they were trying so hard to do such a good job with such a challenging child. And they did the best job they can. And they're different people now. And yeah, we all have regrets. And I'm just so proud of them for trying the best job and doing the best job they can coming from that place where they both came from. And I hope that someday my children can say that of me. That's what I hope. So I love you guys. I hope you enjoyed this episode. I'd love to know what you think and any thoughts that you have. And I pray that the Lord will cover you with a healing balm for anything that's happened in your childhood, that God will just heal you. He will restore you to wholeness, and that you can begin to forgive and understand where maybe your parents were coming from. Thanks for joining me. Have a great day. Love you guys. Thank you so much for joining me on today's episode. If you would like to find out more about what I am up to, go to verycaripodcast.com, click on the menu button, and under the tab You Are Here, that's a U and an R and a here, you can find out about the coaching I am now offering. I would love, love, love to have you be a part of what I am doing. Head to the website, check it out, and thanks again for joining me today.